Did you know that Spectre, despite being one of the most expensive James Bond films ever made at a staggering $300 million budget, opened with a record-breaking single-take shot that almost didn't happen? The iconic Day of the Dead sequence in Mexico City wasn't even in the original script. It was added later to secure $20 million in tax credits. But this stunning opening would become both a blessing and a curse, setting expectations so high that the rest of the film struggled to match its brilliance. This is the story of how one of the most anticipated Bond films of all time went from being a potential masterpiece to a confused mess that nearly ended Daniel Craig's tenure as 007. Welcome to the autopsy of Spectre. Even the masterful director Sam Mendes, returning after the billion-dollar success of Skyfall and the long-awaited rights to use Bond's greatest nemesis Spectre finally secured, something went terribly wrong. A rushed production schedule, creative burnout, and the pressure to connect 4 movies worth of storylines would transform what should have been Craig's triumphant penultimate outing into a cautionary tale about the dangers of forcing connections where none existed. The film that promised to reveal the author of all Bond's pain instead revealed the cracks in the foundation of the modern Bond franchise. But before we dive in, a real quick ask that if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button now. It's one small click for you, but an enormous deal for us. Thanks. Now, let's explore what really went wrong with James Bond's most expensive misstep. Reason number 1, the pressure of forced connections. Let's start with Spectre's most fundamental flaw, the desperate attempt to retroactively connect everything. The film falls into the classic franchise trap of trying to make previous standalone stories feel connected somehow. Remember how Casino Royale worked perfectly as its own story, or how Skyfall told a deeply personal tale about Bond and M without needing elaborate backstory connections? But Spectre abandoned the successful formula by insisting that everything from Vesper's death to Silva's revenge were orchestrated by one man, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. This revelation wasn't just unnecessary, it actively damaged the impact of previous films. Le Chiffre, Dominic Green, and Silva were compelling villains precisely because they had their own motivations. Reducing them to mere pawns in Blofeld's grand scheme didn't make the story more interesting, it made it less believable. The most ridiculous example came with the forced brother connection between Bond and Blofeld. Not only did this feel like a cheap attempt to copy the I am your father revelations of some other franchises, but it also undermined the core appeal of their rivalry. The original Blofeld was threatening because he was Bond's philosophical opposite, a man trying to create chaos in Bond's orderly world. Making him Bond's jealous adoptive brother turned their conflict from an epic clash of ideologies into a petty family squabble. Reason number 2, the rushed production. How do you follow up a billion-dollar success like Skyfall? Apparently by rushing its sequel into production before the script is even ready. While Skyfall benefited from MGM's bankruptcy, giving the writers 10 months to perfect the script, Spectre was pushed through development at breakneck speed to meet a predetermined release date. The consequences of this rushed production are evident throughout the movie. Plot threads are picked up and abandoned, character motivations shift inexplicably. Even the film's central surveillance plot feels half-baked, with Blofeld's ultimate plan never clearly explained. The Sony email hack revealed that multiple versions of the script were being considered even as filming began. Not a good sign for a $300 million production. Director Sam Mendes himself later admitted that the pressure to deliver a quick follow-up to Skyfall affected the creative process. Unlike Casino Royale or Skyfall, which had time to explore different story possibilities, Spectre was locked into a release date before its story was fully formed. The result was a film that often feels like it's making up the plot as it goes along. Reason number 3, the identity crisis. Spectre suffers from a severe case of tonal whiplash. The film can't decide whether it wants to be a gritty modern espionage thriller like Casino Royale or a throwback to the more fantastical Bond films of old. This identity crisis is evident in every aspect of the film. One moment we're watching a serious discussion about government surveillance and privacy rights, the next we're in an absurdly sterile villain's lair that wouldn't feel out of place in a Roger Moore-era Bond film. The movie wants to maintain Craig's more realistic take on Bond while simultaneously indulging in the franchise's most outlandish tropes. This confusion extends to the action sequences. The opening Day of the Dead sequence and the train fight with Mr. Hinks was brilliantly choreographed. Brutal encounters that feel true to Craig's Bond. But when we have Bond escaping an exploding building with barely a scratch or shooting down a helicopter with a pistol from a moving boat, these are moments that belong in a different kind of Bond film entirely. Reason number 4, the Blofeld blunder. When Christoph Waltz was cast, everyone immediately suspected he would be playing Blofeld, despite the filmmaker's insistence that he was a new character named Franz Oberhauser. This attempted misdirection only served to make the eventual reveal feel anticlimactic. But the real problem wasn't the predictability, it was the execution. The original Blofeld worked because he was the dark mirror of everything Bond stood for: order versus chaos, loyalty versus betrayal, duty versus self-interest. Instead of building on this rich history, Spectre reduces him to a petty, jealous adoptive brother. It's as if the writers looked at what made Blofeld iconic and deliberately went in the opposite direction. Even Waltz, an actor who excels at playing memorable villains, seemed constrained by this limited interpretation. Reason number 5. The wasted potential. One of the most frustrating aspects of Spectre is how it wastes its considerable assets. The film assembles an incredible cast, employs some of the industry's finest craftspeople, and has the largest budget of any Bond film ever, yet fails to maximize any of these advantages. Take Monica Bellucci's character, for instance. The film made headlines for casting the oldest Bond woman in the series' history, then gives her barely 5 minutes of screen time. The talented Andrew Scott is reduced to playing a one-dimensional, bureaucratic villain. Even Dave Bautista's Mr. Hinks, who shows promise as a formidable physical threat, disappears from the film without explanation after the train sequence. The same goes for the film's locations. Despite shooting in Mexico City, Rome, Austria, Morocco, and London, most of these stunning locations feel interchangeable. Compare this to how Casino Royale used Montenegro, or how Skyfall utilized Shanghai and Scotland. Each location in those films had a distinct personality that added to the story. In Spectre, they're just exotic backdrops for action sequences. Reason number 6. The romance problem. James Bond falling in love is not unprecedented. We've seen it before in On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Casino Royale. But those films earned their love stories through careful character development. Spectre expects us to believe in Bond's romance with Madeleine Swann despite giving us little reason to invest in their relationship. Léa Seydoux is a talented actress, but her character's journey from "I will not sleep with you to help with my daddy issues" to "I love you" during a single train ride feels unearned. The film tells us they're perfect for each other rather than showing us why. We're meant to believe this is the relationship that makes Bond quit MI6, yet it lacks the emotional depth of his connection with Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale. Reason number 7. The surveillance subplot that went nowhere. For a film that positions government surveillance as its central modern-day threat, Spectre handles this theme with surprising superficiality. The Nine Eyes program, meant to be the linchpin of Blofeld's master plan, is never properly explained or utilized in a meaningful way. What could have been a compelling commentary on post-Snowden privacy concerns instead becomes a vague MacGuffin. The film raises interesting questions about the balance between security and privacy, then abandons them in favor of explosions and car chases. Even M's impassioned speech about the dangers of unchecked surveillance feels disconnected from the rest of the plot. This represents a larger problem with the film, its inability to meaningfully engage with the real-world issues it raises. While Casino Royale tackled post-9/11 terrorism and Skyfall addressed cyber warfare, Spectre merely uses contemporary concerns as window dressing for a more traditional Bond plot. What could have saved the film? Looking back, there are several ways Spectre could have avoided these pitfalls. First, abandon the forced connections. Instead of trying to retroactively tie everything together, let Spectre stand on its own as a worthy addition to the Craig era. Spectre could have been introduced as a present threat rather than a hidden puppet master of past events. Second, give the script more time to develop. Skyfall proved that taking time to get the story right pays dividends. A delayed release is always better than a rushed product. Third, commit to an identity. Either embrace the gritty realism of Craig's earlier films or fully commit to the classic Bond elements. Trying to do both resulted in a movie that excelled at neither. But that's just our opinion. What do you think? Which aspect of Spectre disappointed you the most? Was it the wasted potential of Blofeld, the forced family connections, or something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to catch our next deep dive into cinema's most fascinating stories. This video is made by movie fans for movie fans.